Good morning, everybody, and welcome to Cleveland. We have, unusually, it seems, some good weather for you, so hopefully that'll last at least through the day. Yeah, it might snow or sleet or hail tomorrow, you never know. It's Cleveland. I'm I think, very fortunate to be moderating such a stellar panel. I think we'll launch your conference on a inspiring and hopefully creative note, because I think what we have to present to you this morning is a real spectrum of situations and issues, but our three different issues share some similarities but also have some distinguishing characteristics, and two of them are in the professional arena, in what I like to call the two pillars of democracy: public education and the press. And then one is in low-wage worker struggles. So I think we're going to hear a real spectrum of challenges to the labor movement, and as well as share some victories, some substantial victories, some mixed victories and defeats, which is, I think, what we're all confronted with most of the time anyway. So we have first. We're gonna talk first of all about organizing a charter school, and I think we organized the third one in the country here in Cleveland. Is it the second or the third? We're the third to go on strike. Sorry. And then we're going to move to a struggle, a very, very important struggle in the newspaper industry, which has sort of been playing out in Cleveland for a number of years now. And then we're going to end up with the struggle of janitors to get $15 an hour in Cleveland, which has really been a pretty dynamic and exciting battle in and of itself. So one thing I'd like to, well, a couple things I want to point out. One is, even though this is neither new nor surprising, I think it bears worth mentioning the incredible anti-union virulence of management is just everywhere on display in Cleveland, Ohio. Cleveland, Ohio is a Democratic city. Almost everybody's a Democrat. You think it's kind of this liberal union town, but the bosses, the management in Cleveland across the board is just unbelievably anti-union and also pretty ignorant of unions. I think in the corporate sector they have this 19th century view of union people with, clubs and stuff. And, it is true that well into the 80s and 90s, we were in Cleveland blowing each other up every now and then, but 80s, not 90s, but in the early 80s, it was going on. But still, I mean, they have this incredibly archaic view of unions. But we also discovered, interestingly, this spring, that the public sector employers are even worse, because they employ union members. I mean, their sector is the most heavily organized across the country, so they are employers. And we had a situation in Cleveland which just blew us all away, I think, because the county has a lot of, interestingly, in Cuyahoga County, which is where we are now, there are quite a number, even some of the judicial offices are organized. We've got quite a bit of organized county employees. And AFL-CIO is an SEIU, and the CWA, lots of unions have members at the county. I think Unite Here has, and Workers United, lots of unions represent workers at the county level. But, and these, as I said, this is a Democratic county, so all these Democrats, many of whom have been endorsed for years, from the county executive to the county council to, a lot of the judges and the whole shooting match. And, we know them, they know lots of labor leaders, they know lots of union members, they're very familiar with unions, and they continuously ask us for money, which is often handed over. And they exhibited not only a high-handed arrogance, like in the worst sectors of the worst quarters of the private sector, but real, genuine ignorance of what a union is and what a union does. For instance, at the county, they thought we had a situation at the jail. 8 people died in the space of 1 year, the county jail. some suicides and some, who knows what all. They just ended up dead. So it was a huge scandal, as you can imagine. It may yet topple the county executive. But there were two unions that represented folks who worked at the jail, the UAW and AFSCME. UAW represented the RNs who worked at the jail, and AFSCME represented the LPNs and the other medical staff. This is just the medical part of the jail. And I think the UAW represents the corrections officers as well. But just thinking of the medical piece, the medical work at the jail had already been contracted out to the local hospital. But what happened was the county thought, first of all, they didn't bother to return phone calls to the union. The county thought that if they just took care of the people, the individual people, by giving them buyouts or, allowing them to move into another job, that everything was good. Forgetting altogether that the union in and of itself is an institution. The collective bargaining agreement is critically important, way more important, quite honestly, than individual workers, because it would extend to all future workers, and going into the future would offer protection for people. And they thought that by taking care of Jane and Joe and John and Jim, everybody should be happy. Completely misunderstanding, what a collective bargaining agreement does, the protections that unions offer, the very necessary protections that unions offer. In fact, there's a current state senator told me that she was a corrections officer in the jail in 1994, and as a corrections officer in the county jail, not a fun job. They were making, in 94, $6 an hour. So that's, not only are their working conditions terrible, but their pay was terrible. And the situation in the jail with 8 people dying in a year was horrible. And yet the county, these good friends of ours, good friends of labor who run the county, were completely and totally ignorant and high-handed and arrogant when it came to their own employees and their own collective bargaining agreements. So I think we got a lot of work to do with public officials. I think one of the problems that we have in Cleveland is we go to the union leaders go to their fundraisers, they know them, backslapping, beer swilling at the fundraiser, but they don't know a thing about what unions do. They just don't understand, even, CBA. So we're actually in a week, we're having a candidate briefing, which is going to really focus on the public sector, because actually these candidates are going to be elected into the public sector, and really try to drill down into, what the importance of a collective bargaining agreement. So that's just kind of a side note. But what I'd like to do, the first person I'd like to bring up, in fact, why doesn't the panel come on up and have a seat? The first speaker today is Kelly Granda. And Kelly, this is Kelly here. Kelly is a 13-year veteran? 16-year veteran of a small charter school in Parma, Ohio. And you can, and this is a school that focuses on special education, basically, and it's a charter school. It's been around for a while. Cleveland loves its charter schools. We have a continuous battle about charter schools, but this one, since we have so many, I think the AFT thought this is a good place to start organizing charters. And I have to give a shout out to the AFT. They put a lot of resources and time into organizing charters in Cuyahoga County. We've got seven now organized. Is it 7? Somebody. 8. Oh, 8. Thank you, Monty. Monty's one of the people responsible for that. But so we have, so it's pretty exciting, actually. But the conditions, working conditions in these schools are, go from bad to worse. And Kelly Granda has got to be in the top 0.1% of dedicated teachers, because she's worked there for many years. She's endured terrible working conditions for many years and has stayed there for many years because of her dedication to her craft, to her students, and to basically helping students with special needs. So she's the very picture of dedication, and she's going to talk to you about the incredible battle that ended in victory at Summit Academy in Parma, Ohio. Kelly Granda.
Good morning. Yeah, I'm Kelly Granda. I've been teaching art at a charter school on the west side of Cleveland for 16 years. It's a school that's for students who, majority of them have been diagnosed with ADHD or an autism spectrum disorder. And my school advertises the special education program that'll have 2 teachers in each classroom, small class sizes, and I would say maybe a third of my students have been kicked out of a public school for their behaviors, been suspended multiple times, and then they would hit that number where they could no longer attend that school anymore. So for years I've defended my school as a place that was providing something that these students couldn't get in the public school. And I was aware of the criticism of charter schools and the lack of accountability. But being in the classroom with my students, I knew that I was providing what they needed, and so my personal perspective was that it was a good idea and that we really were helping our students. Unfortunately, the workload is really hard, and it's almost emotionally abusive when you work with kids with so many special needs and behavior disorders, that they take it out on their teachers and the people who love them. A lot of teachers don't last more than a few years. Yeah, the pay is very low. I think that people who choose to stay in special education, there's a sense of pride in that you're doing something that's very, very important. And if you can afford to stay, or your partner makes more money than you, which is the case of everyone that I work with, or they choose to live with their parents and raise their children and living with another family or something so that they can afford to keep doing this work. So I always knew what a union was, but I thought that if you were in a charter school, you weren't allowed to join. We would talk about it, we would whisper about it. I also worked under a contract for many years. I wouldn't even say it was a contract. It was something that was presented to us each year that said, if you leave before this date, you will pay us $2,000. If you leave before this, if you wait until after this date, you'll pay us $4,000 to get out. Sign this, and you get this low pay for another year. So yeah, my mom was a public school teacher. When I was a kid, my teachers went on strike. I knew what it was, but I knew that it wasn't something I could do if I wanted to keep working with my students. And then it was really interesting how the idea came to the gym teacher, the physical education teacher that I worked with. He was getting frustrated by talk of merit-based pay, and we hadn't had a raise in years, but they were saying that, we always have a little bit of money left over. Maybe we'll set up this evaluation system, and some of you will get a bonus. And we were always saying, like, you can look up on ODE, the Ohio Department of Education website, and see that for my experience, I could be making $25,000 more per year anywhere else. So that wasn't good enough. And we attended a DACA rally to support undocumented immigrants in September 2017 in Ohio City. And we met some other union members and kind of found out that actually there recently had been charter teachers in Cleveland who got their first contract. And we looked into it more, and we were introduced to our organizer. And we started having these meetings after work. We would work a full day, and then we would go meet at Dunkin' or a bar or the library, and it was like a therapy session. And for somebody to say that, like, he couldn't believe that we had to clean up puke, and that we gave up our lunch breaks like pretty often because a student was too violent to be at recess with their classmates, so they would stay with us. And just this idea of all these things that we had gotten so used to hearing from someone on the outside that, like, oh, you shouldn't have to put up with that, was really therapeutic and nice. So we had started this process in the fall, but it was only a few of us, and it was very secretive because even though the card that we got from the union said, you're protected to talk about this at these times or whatever. We had seen lots of people get fired for their opinions over the years. And they would say it was for something else, but you knew that it was because this person had said negative things about the CEO at a professional development, and someone overheard, and then they were gone Monday. So it had to be kept really quiet until we were sure that a majority of us were on board to improve things for our students. So ironically, in November, there was a RIF, and we had already been very understaffed, and they took away six staff members, and it was 3 teachers, and we only had 28 teachers, so we're down to 25. And I think management still thinks that that's why we thought we should form a union, but we were already doing this. And they cited financial hardship, and we thought, I really haven't cost them any money ever. None of us have. We wrote proposals and grants ourselves. All the art supplies in my classroom were donated through Donors Choose, and random people donating. Sometimes at the end of a school year, they would say quickly by May 1st you have to spend $1,000 or something, but it was never when you needed it. Okay, so anyway, I'm not a public speaker. So we found out that a majority of our staff was on board and interested in taking this risk to stick up for our students. And we circulated a petition. We had a lot of meetings late, informing each other about what this could mean. And I thought one really cool thing about the people I work with, when we asked, like, if money wasn't an issue, like, what would you want? Let's daydream. And everyone said, first thing they would say is a little raise, but not too much. And then there was a long list of things that they would want for the students. And so we came up with very clear things that we needed: a clean school. We needed a full teaching staff, smaller class sizes, that really just what had been advertised on the website, like just provide these families what you said you would. Planning time and lunch breaks, because it would be like you might have a lunch break one year, then you might not get a lunch break for 2 years, which meant you would serve a lunch duty or something. You'd have 20 kids with ADHD eating. It's not like you can enjoy your meal. There's a lot to keep track of. So we turned in a petition in February of that school year, and our boss was completely offended. Just kind of started talking about, like, what her opinions of unions, and, you know, like, oh man, guys, are you really sure about this? This could really, like, get in the way of what we have here. Use the word family. For her, things were good because we were doing all the real work in the trenches, and had learned that, you know, if there wasn't help available, you don't really ask for it anymore. So I think she didn't realize how bad we had it, really. So then we had to endure a couple of days where there was one professional development day where we were supposed to get training about how to work with our students, and instead we viewed these PowerPoints that they put together. The chief HR officer and our principal told us about all the negative things that unions could do, and we didn't have a chance to say anything back, and we didn't really want to. We had already had months worth of meetings learning what a union could do for us, and they kept talking about the union is this thing that was happening to us or that could happen to you, and we knew that we were the ones that sought this out, and it was us sticking up for ourselves and our students. So, I mean, it fell on deaf ears, and then there was another time during a day we got a 1 day's notice that tomorrow you're giving up your 40-minute planning period to sit through another session of this where they just said, you know, and have you even asked how much the union dues are, because you get paid very little, and, you know, would you want your paycheck to be any less? And we still knew that it would be worth it. When you make 30% less than any other teachers in the area, and you you haven't had a raise in 5 years, but what's another 40 or 50 bucks a month, really? So we started negotiations at the end of that school year, and I think we filed our first ULP, unfair labor practice, over, they cut the physical education program, which was headed by the loudest teacher, who was the one that said, come to this rally with me, and introduced me to union people. And at first I was kind of like, cool, yeah, you do that. I'm gonna vote yes, and thank you. You want me to design a logo for you? I'm an art teacher. That's what I can do. I can't wait to make a sign for you or something. And then when he was gone, it seemed pretty strategic that they thought, like, the rest of them will give up. We didn't, and I think it made us a little stronger. And then, he had time to do a lot more work with the unions for us and bring us information. And he really dedicated himself to making sure we were still doing this. So we started negotiating in May at the end of that school year, and the management company that runs our school hired this lawyer, and so we Googled him, and his main specialty was union avoidance. Of course, they didn't hire anyone that specialized in special education or contracts. And our first negotiation session was here downtown, and we work in classrooms where we clean up lunches that were spilled a couple days ago, and we went up to the 36th floor above the Galleria, and beautiful view, grand piano, and you also can Google the average hourly pay for the lawyers in this guy's office is $300 an hour. And we met for, I think, it was like 6 or 7 hours that first time, and we're just told no. It was interesting. Both of our principals resigned at the end of the school year, so they weren't there. We had the chief officer of HR and this lawyer across from 6 teachers and our field representative. And it was very clear. It just said, we presented something we had put together for months, and it was just, no, you're not getting any of this. But we were told expect that the first time. No big deal. And then we continued meeting over the summer, and this guy's making $300 an hour, and I'm living off my teacher pay and paying for a babysitter for 2 kids and volunteering to show up for 120 hours. We negotiated that summer and got nowhere. And then in the fall, or August, they started threatening, like, it looks like we're not going to come to a deal. I don't even know if we should open the school. Like, why open this school with the threat of teachers that might strike on these kids? And so it was a scare tactic, but we also were told to take it seriously. And we asked our members, and everyone was like, we're still doing this. Yeah. Well, if we lose our jobs, we lost our jobs for the right reason. They didn't close the school. Our actual school makes about $200,000 profit for them a year, which they kick back to take care of their underperforming schools. So the math wasn't good for them. Sorry. So anyway, we called their bluff on that. We heard things through negotiations, like, I remember him saying this, I'm sorry, it doesn't sound sexy, but students are revenue. And, we have to think of this like a business. And I'm sorry that you're lucky you don't have to think of this like a business, but paying teachers more right now it's just an unnecessary expense. So that's what we were up against. So we decided we had to be a little more public about it, and it was like, should we go to the media and tell them that our CEO who runs our school doesn't have a bachelor's degree yet, but pays himself $240,000 a year, and I've been there for 15 years, and I'm almost making $40,000. no, let's not do that. That's too low. But so we had heard this idea about a walk-in. And out of the 25 teachers who were left after that riff, there were 18 of us who were comfortable showing our faces and holding signs. And so we would meet a few times a month out in front of our school from like 7:15 to 7:45. And we're supposed to be clocked in at 7:45. And we would stand out there and just hold signs and dance and play music. And our signs would say, "I'm not an unnecessary expense. Your students are not revenue to me. Call our CEO if you think your students deserve what's on the website," stuff like that. And, parents noticed and they asked questions. And so then we had flyers available at parent-teacher conferences just saying, this is how it's been going. We have only been asking for a clean school, a full teaching staff, small class sizes, planning time, and guaranteed lunch breaks. Who would argue with that? And there was a majority of support from parents and from students, and some parents would drop their kids off early on those days and ask, "Will you watch my kid, and can they hold a sign?" And so it became a thing. We noticed that in negotiations, the lawyer and the head of HR would quote things that we had only posted on our individual Twitter accounts. So they were definitely paying attention to us. We didn't involve media until we were coming up close on the 1-year mark, where the lawyer was excited about the possibility of decertification. And we invited a news crew to one of our board meetings, and parents were speaking a lot about why they came to Summit Academy, naming specific teachers as the reasons that they stayed, saying that they had never seen these people who are taking this money that comes in federally for their students' IEP and for their disabilities, and could they see the breakdown mathematically how it's possible that when you've gotten rid of so many special education teachers that my child is getting these minutes promised in their plan. And they were pretty silent. The CEO still wasn't showing up to negotiations. When that camera crew came and they filmed things that, like, there was this giant hole in the boys' bathroom that the boys used to try to pee into, and it was pretty high. And then one janitor for a giant school couldn't keep up, and it wasn't her fault. But we had put in like work tickets for a couple of months about this hole. And as soon as it was on the news, it was the next day, there were maintenance people from the main offices in Akron, and they're fixing it. It was like there were at least 5 or 6 of us who had put in a ticket for these specific things. And, some of my students are aggressive and they get angry and they might kick something or punch a hole in the wall. And there were plenty that I had fixed, and I don't know how to do that stuff, so it didn't look great. And when all these parents were coming in for these board meetings and seeing the working conditions, and my own husband came in and he was just kind of like, "I would never send our kids here. And I don't like that you work here. Like, it's dirty." We had a scabies outbreak, which I know that isn't necessarily a fault of the cleaning, but just of not having enough staff to keep an eye on and notice a kid that's been itching for a long time until it passes around to so many people. So I know I'm talking a lot. I'm just saying quickly. We ended up getting to the point that we said the word strike, and the lawyer literally said, "Well, we know you wouldn't do that to your students. You care way too much about your students to go on strike." And we said back, "We care enough about our students that we will if you're not going to at least do these. We haven't even talked about our wages, but you're not willing to give what's on your website." So it came down to it. And when we originally had 18 people who were in, when it came to signing a petition to strike, we had 21. I think they were a little freaked out, and they tried to move a little bit for the first time at a negotiation that went on a Friday night, was before MLK weekend. It went like until midnight or 1 a.m., but they still weren't offering. And they just kept saying, "Well, how could we guarantee that? We can't guarantee these things, and not even best efforts." Or so we ended up going on strike, and it was really empowering. it was the middle of the winter and it was freezing cold. It was like camping, but it also was, it was for the right reasons. We had a lot of support, and maybe some of you in here were there, but you probably were so covered up in clothing that I wouldn't recognize anyone. There was a lot of media coverage, and they tried to bring in substitutes that they were training for 2 days, and it took them a long time to get anyone willing to do it. And from a friend I had on the inside, I found out that first they offered 110 a day, and nobody was coming, and it was like an auction, up to 200 a day. And when I make 160 is my pay rate after being there for 15 years, and I've had all the training to work with special ed kids. These were just nice people who thought they were going to be helpful with a bachelor's degree or something, but it turned out they weren't able to open the school. While we were on strike, milk trucks wouldn't deliver, so you can't have school without lunches. UPS wouldn't deliver some curriculum supplies. The mailman kept showing up, at 3:30 or 4 after everyone had left. So there were lots of acts of solidarity. We had people that would post things on Twitter like, feed these teachers, they like pizza, and then we got 40 pizzas for the 23 of us that were out there. I set up a strike headquarters in my basement because I lived close, and you would think it was a sad, desolate time, but it was actually very empowering and important. I had a lot of quality time with my students on the picket line. They weren't able to open the school, so parents were taking off work, and you would think they might be really upset with us, but instead they were showing up and making their own signs and dancing to stay warm, and just honking. Like, we were in a great location right down the road from the Chevy plant. There were lots of people showing their support. So on the eighth workday of strike, I contacted the CEO personally, and I said, we have negotiations, and I think you need to be there. And I wasn't supposed to do that, and he definitely wasn't supposed to talk to me. And he said, Kelly, what difference do you think that'll make? And I said, I think it'll make every bit of difference. I don't know that this lawyer's told you anything. I'm worried what he's told you about the people you've hired. He showed up, and we got everything that we had asked for on that list. And we were there until midnight. But when we realized that what we all wanted or said we wanted was for the students, that was the place to work from. So we got a contract with a wage reopener for the fall. Unfortunately, you say we won, but we lost 8 teachers. When you're on strike and people see how little you make and they hear how good you are, public schools wanted them, and I've been approached too, and it's a tough decision. I'm lucky to be able to afford to stay for another year and try to hold them accountable. But there were a lot of tears from students. They lost good teachers. Yeah, I think that's all that I would say. I said a lot, but I really, at this point, probably more in need of advice of where we go from here. And I have a lot more, but I don't even know what's important of it, but thank you.
If you could make note of your questions and comments and advice, we're going to have the panel speak first, but we really, for us, the most important part of this session is the Q&A. So if you could try to remember your questions and comments and advice for Kelly. I just will say, just very briefly, the teachers there got what they needed for the students and for some of their working conditions. They didn't get a pay raise, and they've got a reopener in September, but there's challenges with that as well. So maybe, when we do get to the Q&A, Kelly can talk a little bit about that. And I next want to introduce Rachel Dissell. Rachel Dissell is a reporter extraordinaire for the Plain Dealer. She's an investigative reporter. She's done wonderful, wonderful work on lead and, big stories on investigative stories that have really educated our community in about lots of important topics over the years. And she was one of the leaders of in the union there. She represents her union is Local 1, the first newspaper local in the country, and it's got a long and storied history. And Rachel is going to talk about the struggles that they've had with the Plain Dealer over the years, and most recently this 2018 and especially 2019. Rachel Dissell.
Can you hear me? Is this on? We'll do easy things. No, we got it. So like Harriet said, our Northeast Ohio Newspaper Guild is Local 1, and so Cleveland and Akron news folks started organizing in 1933. So we're like literally at the opposite end of what Kelly was talking about. And we were originally the American Newspaper Guild. And, we organized and got some of the earliest contracts at what was then the Cleveland News and the Cleveland Press. And when we were doing that, we were literally organizing and negotiating contracts. Of course, it wasn't me doing that, but for reporters to get minimum wage, severance if they were let go, and a 40-hour work week. So it was kind of at the very beginning of this movement. And also worker safety, fair wages. And from the very beginning, reporters in our units have worked on racial and gender equality. I don't think that we have done as well with racial equality in the newsroom. Our newsroom currently does not reflect the composition of our community. We've done a little bit better with gender equality. We now have more women that work for the paper that are employed doing reporting as journalists than men. But one of the things that, we've kind of learned over this trajectory is that journalists are extremely hard to organize. And it's just kind of an interesting thing that as part of our jobs, we feel like we should be advocating for the community and telling stories that need to be told. And we are absolutely horrific at advocating for ourselves and telling our own stories. We tend to spend more time on the issues that we feel like we should be covering sometimes than on the issues in our own newsroom. And then generally around time when our contract is going up, we're like, oh my gosh, all these issues that we have to deal with that we haven't spent time dealing with because we're doing a lot of the job that we really care about. So the other issue that we kind of run into is that we kind of come at things from this kind of like ethical positioning of remaining objective. And so being in the labor world has been kind of difficult for some journalists. We represent, we're a union, but one of the jokes, and I think it actually turned into a book title, is that we're a union of individuals. It's just, there's some dissonance there. Pretty much no labor attorney wants to be the person working with the union of reporters, because a meeting that would last like 20 minutes where you explain some central tenets turns into like a rousing debate about everything in the world. When you think you might get 10 questions from members, you'll get 110. When you're trying to deal with like a pension or healthcare, everybody's an expert and they will all read every word of what you give them. So it's helpful, but it also sometimes makes things more difficult for us to kind of center ourselves around the issues that are most important. And so, over the years, we've kind of changed a little bit. Now Cleveland and Akron are the same unit. We're together, the Northeast Ohio Newspaper Guild. Then our national guild joined together with CWA in the mid-1990s, so that changed things a little bit. And that happened just a few years prior to when our owners, the brilliant folks who own a lot of media across the country, decided to start giving away all of our work product for free. So I don't know, everybody else, but, public school is free, but there's a cost to it. Taxpayers pay it. But someone decided brilliantly that if we just put all of our really hard work on the internet and let people have it, that they somehow would know that there was a value to it without paying for it. As if I opened up a hamburger stand and gave away everything for free for several decades, and then one day decided to start charging $100 a day for my hamburger, and people would be like, oh yeah, sure, I'll pay that. It just doesn't really work that way. And so it's put reporters in a really difficult position of really wanting, and it's very similar to what Kelly was talking about. Like, you really care deeply about your work. You care deeply about the communities that you cover. You don't want to work for free just because they're giving your content away for free, but that ends up falling on your shoulders. So, we started from a position where we're very lucky. We had very good contracts over the years. At one point, negotiating with our owners, which is the Newhouse family. They're the 12th richest family in the country, if you want to check the Forbes list, although I don't know if any of us believe the Forbes list anymore because of all the Trump stuff, but maybe they're lying about how much they're worth. I don't think so. There was one point where we were negotiating with them, and they had given us such good contracts. Nobody knew what else to give anybody, and our healthcare was so overfunded, they had to start putting money into IRAs for people. There was no more possible vacation days they could give people. So when I started, it was from a very good position. And from then, it just really went downhill. When I started at the Plain Dealer, we had more than 300 union journalists doing this work. And I was an intern, and that was in 2001. At the end of our recent negotiations, we have about 35. So just imagine being in any working conditions where you're doing hard work and working very hard, and then you end up kind of on the Titanic trying to decide whether you'll be the last one listening to the band play. It's a really difficult decision to make. It was also difficult to watch, our union really struggle with this. We got to the point where Cleveland and Akron, we can barely support just paying our staff, our one staff and our part-time bookkeeper, with, the dues that we make now. So that was really exacerbated a couple years back in 2013. The Newhouse family wanted to kind of make a final effort to maybe stamp out the union, and they cut our newsroom basically in half and started a digital newsroom and offered jobs to some people to work in the digital newsroom, and then hired a bunch of very young reporters at a much lower wage to work in this digital newsroom. And so it caused us, great heartache that we had two different newsrooms that were both kind of essentially working both for online and both for the paper. One set of people had a pretty different, set of wages, except for a couple holdovers from our newsroom. I think there was some trying to balance of that so that they didn't see what the disparity was. But we also, would hear from the younger reporters kind of on the other side, that they didn't get a choice of whether, they had to work overtime or not. That they might work a whole bunch of hours in the beginning of the week and then be sent home, later in the week. They often felt like they had to do work at home, and they had a complete inability to kind of question their bosses in any way. And one of the important things I think about our contract was not only that we had fair wages and got overtime and had vacation, but it really gave us a voice in our newsroom because we can question our managers on coverage, and we even have a provision that allows us to withhold our most important capital, which is our byline. So if we feel like we are being asked to do something that is unfair or unethical or that we disagree with, we can't refuse to do the work, but we can say, my name is not going on this. And people will wonder why. And it's so powerful that we have only had to really use it a handful of times, because no person who's running a newspaper wants readers to start questioning why the stories don't have names attached to them. It's something that readers will notice immediately. So more recently, after this cut, which caused great confusion and a lot of frustration and heartache between people that used to work together, and just caused a lot of confusion in the community. Why am I hearing about these two different brands? I mean, it really was detrimental to a brand that the newspaper had spent 175 years building, to kind of cut it up and say it was a bunch of different entities, and the community didn't know who they were talking to. You know, they didn't know, am I talking to Cleveland.com? Am I talking to the Plain Dealer? So it's you know, a mess is probably the best way to put it. And so one of the other things that we found curious is that even though we were two separate companies, and we were told we're two separate companies again and again, even though we have the same owners, is that we kept having cuts made to our staff. And even the leader of this separate company would go on the radio and say, well, we're having to make some cuts to our staff because the Plain Dealer's not making much money. And we're like, really? Because we're two separate companies. That's interesting. But nonetheless, it's been a difficult thing for us to negotiate over, because there is no denying that revenues in our industry have declined. You know, so we can't go to the company and say, you're wrong, your revenues haven't declined. You can, you know, afford to pay every reporter that you paid before. But we also know they're still making money off of the newspaper, you know, and so we have tried to convince them to, you know, if you invest in your product and you actually, you know, have any marketing, we have no marketing, we have no local circulation, and we cut the days that our newspaper delivered, you know, down to just a couple. And we're like, so you basically told people your product is less valuable, right? In print by not making it essential every day. You gave it away online for free. You have no customer service, and you have no marketing to tell people what you're doing is important or good. But then the rest of it's on us. So now we've been told, like, you have to be out there in the community promoting this. You have to make online promotions. You have to make newspaper promotions. So like each time there's one of these cuts, it kind of gets put back on us. And that is in addition to, we know we at one point took an 8% decrease in our pay. We took furlough days. All of these things, you know, in negotiations in the past in order to keep more staff. Late last year, they came to us and basically said, we plan to outsource a portion of your staff that creates the art for the newspaper, that copy edits the entire newspaper, and that lays out the newspaper on its pages. We think this is the most efficient way to do it. We're going to use these hubs that kind of like float around in the atmosphere in different cities, and they're going to be more efficient because they'll do multiple pages. Immediately, our concern was that these people don't know our community. They don't know what direction Lake Erie is. They don't know whether we use the middle initial for the mayor or not. It was a huge, huge quality concern for us. You know, as reporters, we really value copy editors and folks who question our work. It's essential that nobody is just writing something and publishing it without another set of eyes. And they were trying to say that that was not valuable. The same with the folks that lay out the paper. They were kind of saying, well, the visual, the way it looks doesn't really matter. It could look the same in Cleveland as it looks in Portland, as it looks in New Orleans. It doesn't really matter. And we really felt that mattered so much, because if you cover a local community, you know, each community has its own flavor, its own things that it likes and dislikes, its own feel to it. And we felt that this was kind of an erasure of that. You know, just for the sake of money. We also know that some of our very experienced copy editors and layout people, they know what needs to be done to make sure that things are fair. You know, they can kind of not just read an individual story, but they step back and they look at the entire curation of the newspaper to try to make sure what's in there is for our community. You know, we don't know whether someone in New Jersey could figure that out, right? So we really did try to fight that effort. We tried to get community support. We held a concert that more than 500 people attended. And we had some challenges with our messaging. Our messaging really was asking people to stand up and support local journalism and also support the Guild. But as part of our contract, we could not disparage the product or the company. So we were really walking a fine line of standing up for ourselves, standing up for local journalism, not saying anything bad about the paper. We could cite worries of what we thought could happen, but we also thought very carefully and had a lot of debates among our members about what to do about the online newsroom, the Cleveland.com issue. Some very much wanted to take aim at the poor quality of some of the stuff that was going up online. Others, and I was among these folks, said that I feel like those employees deserve representation too. And if we take aim at them, and they feel that that's unfair, any chance of ever mobilizing that group or organizing them will be lost. It already will be a very difficult venture, because people are scared and they want to keep their jobs. But I don't think, as a person that very much values what unions do, that kind of taking down another group of people that don't have the opportunities that we do with a contract was the right thing to do. I would like them to have a 40-hour work week. I would like them to have a wage that they think is fair. I would like them to have reasonable vacation and affordable health care as well. And I think that some of the problems that they have weren't created by them. They're created by them being overworked. And so that was kind of the decision that we came to. So it made it very hard for us to message for things in the community, because often the community didn't know what to do. I mean, immediately when reporters go out and say, our company's treating us bad, people's first response is what? Do you want me to cancel the paper? And we were like, no, don't do that. Like, they'll just get rid of more people, We don't want to diminish the value of our product either. But we wanted people to tell, our employers that they did value it and that they would continue to buy it. At the same time, we were like, yeah, they're trying to make it worse. So it was a lot to grapple with. We were also in negotiations left with some really, and I think this kind of gets to, like, in the beginning of a contract, you have a lot of hard decisions to make, and it doesn't get any easier down the road. We were left with a lot of difficult decisions, because when you have been a union for a long time and you have, employees who have been working for you for 20 or 30 years who are on the chopping block, you often have to choose between, fighting a larger labor fight and securing benefits for people who really need them, who have done their job for years. And in our situation, we thought that we had a pretty decent argument that we could prove that this was indeed one company and not two. We did a lot of legal research. We had a super fantastic lawyer. We had collected a lot of information. We're journalists. We had memos and all this other stuff. And we really thought that we had at least a 60, 70% chance of winning that battle. But it would probably take 2 to 3 years. We would have to go through arbitration, through the court system. And by the time we got an outcome on that, we were not sure what it would do to benefit anybody. I mean, really, by the time we got an answer, even if we won, there might not even be a newspaper anymore. It could be gone. We were at a point where our contract was supposed to expire. And the company got very, very, very agitated with us because they failed to give us notice in time that they wanted to renegotiate the contract, to start negotiations. Our contract specifically says they have to send it to us by certified mail. And someone sent an email and did not send anything in the mail. And we're like, yeah, well, we don't think that's notice. So sorry, we're not negotiating with you. And they said, that's bull crap. We gave you notice. And we said, oh, well, looks like the labor board has said, like, if it says certified mail, it's certified mail. They were so enraged by that, that they said, fine, your contract is now rolled over for a year, but we're going to lay off more reporters. Because we now can't come in and cut your pay. We're going to get rid of more people. So that was the kind of situation we were in, where we're like, well, we kind of got protections for some people a little more, but and in reality, they probably were going to do that anyways, but it just gave them a reason to kind of say, what they were going to do. So we found ourselves in the position of then negotiating on two fronts, negotiating over outsourcing of an entire group of more than about 24 people, and then negotiating over the outcomes of what were going to be layoffs for another 14 people, kind of at the same time. So this was like 6 really excruciating months. And one of the best things we felt we could do was very closely work with our membership to see what they wanted. Because I think, for me personally, I was all about fighting the big battle. I'm like, fuck this, let's fight the company. But I did not have the most to lose. I could be outspoken. Nobody was going to fire me. You know what I mean? But other people, we had several members that were in the midst of chemo. They're fighting cancer. And if they lost their health care, what were they going to do? So we kept really close tabs on what people wanted. We did these constant surveys with people saying, if the decisions are this, 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 and this, what matters most to you? And I felt like that was the best way we could honor our contract we had with our members, and the folks that were doing the negotiating, was to really listen to what they wanted to say. And it was extremely close. There was a lot of people who wanted to fight the company as well. When it came down to it, though, our members did not want to fight a battle that they wanted to fight in principle if it was going to harm other folks. So we in the end, we're in this room, we're being nickel and dimed over healthcare, which is like the most frustrating thing, is being nickel and dimed over healthcare when your paper constantly runs editorials about how important freaking health is and how people need to be healthier and how you have the biggest hospitals and the best hospitals in the world. And, I personally pay more than $500 a month for my healthcare before I ever go to the doctor once. So that is very frustrating. And so one of our, tactics was bringing up to our big outside New York lawyer the kind of incongruity about this, where they were refusing to help us extend health care for some of these folks who were very sick at the very same time that the company purchased another company for $1.75 billion. And we're like, really? This is going to cost you like a couple $1,000s compared to the $1.75 billion you spent yesterday. I mean, really. He didn't care. It was only when we publicly started saying that was that he came back with a red face, all aggravated, threw out printed tweets at us and said, are you going to stop saying this shit if we give you your money? And we're like, yeah, we'll think about it. So, I mean, that's kind of how it can get, in a negotiating room, especially when they bring in the big fancy outside lawyers who honestly give a crap about nothing except for getting, being able to say that they got what they said they would get. So in the end, I think we really ended up with an imperfect resolution. Our contract got extended for 2 years. So we kind of like live on in terms of the benefits that we'd already accrued. We don't have to completely rip up a contract that has been negotiated over decades and start over again, which would have been horrible. It would have been horrible to start from the ground up. We got rid of some costly furlough days. So we really tried to work to get something for everybody. So for our members that stayed, they got rid of taking these 11 furlough days every year that we had been forced to take. And it saved them a couple $1,000s. Yes, I mean, they're still paying some of that for the horrible healthcare, but it was some money in their pockets and some assurance that they still had a contract for 2 years, which was really important because if that contract is still in place, even if the company decides to lay everybody off, they still have our negotiated severance in place, which will remain at 2 weeks of pay for every year of service, which is a really good severance for newspaper reporters. It's considered somewhat generous. For some people, that could amount to an entire year of pay. For some people, that could amount to half a year of pay. That's some stability in your life. We got extended health care for all of the people that were being laid off. So they have health care through next year when our contract would have expired. That's a huge thing. That's hundreds and hundreds of dollars a month for people. For folks that did not need health care, we got them a cash payout for a specific amount. Because we had some people who were having to, you just got laid off. You're gonna have to move somewhere to get another job. And the healthcare that we had was so crappy, it was not transportable. It only allowed you to use like one hospital in this city. So we're like, well, what if you get a job in Atlanta? You just can't go to the doctor. So we got them to give a cash payout so someone could purchase their own healthcare if they got another job. And then we also worked pretty closely with the company actually against what the the lawyers negotiating wanted to convince them to take as many volunteers to be laid off as possible. So in the end, we ended up securing some jobs for other folks. We ended up doing some trading to keep a couple people in the newsroom who really wanted to stay, and other folks who had a lot of years of service being able to volunteer to go. And in the end, out of the more than 30 people laid off, there was only 2 people that were considered involuntarily laid off, which it might not seem like a huge distinction when you're losing a workforce, but if you're the person that's getting a phone call, the more people that felt like I got to choose to go rather than being picked, we felt like that was better for them. Mental health wise, we also got to negotiate on how they were notified, how that process worked out. We had some really bad things in the past where an editor would just say, sit at home, and if you don't have a phone call by 10, you're not fired. We're like, that's horrible. How could you do that to people? So in the end, I think we really did come up with an imperfect resolution to this problem. I mean, I kind of feel like usually when you're done negotiating, you're relieved. You're like, oh, that's over. And now we're just like, oh, this lives on. Because now, we have this hope. We see all of these digital news units being organized across the country at BuzzFeed, and like the LA Times is like kicking ass. They're like, look at us, we're unionized. They're so excited. And we're just like, awesome for you guys. It's not exhausting at all to be in this position. So we have this kind of thing of hope and solidarity, but also knowing that it's not all fun forever, especially in when you're working in an area that's kind of on the decline. And what we really want is to be able to work with our company, to be part of the innovation, to live in the future, but they're not really in a position to accept us like that now. We did secure some promises from them in our negotiations to jointly apply for some funding, some grant funding, to improve the diversity in our newsrooms. So we hope we're going to have some negotiating sessions set up on how that will work. And basically, our kind of tentative agreement is that we will be able to jointly get funding to bring in more minority candidates to work in the newsroom at least for a year, in our hopes that they're like so kick-ass they'll just have to hire them, but that they have to get paid our beginning wage scale. They can't hire them for any less than that. So that's what we're kind of working around now. So I think there's also hope there. But also, I think we need, bigger efforts. We've been talking with our, international, like, we're so excited you're organizing all these units, but we need more help here on the ground, because if you're organizing new units and the old units are shrinking and going away, you're not really making gains. So I think we have to do some work into figuring out how, if we're getting, the 60 or 70 or 80th or 100th local at a new digital thing, that we don't lose our first local while we're doing that. So thank you.
Thanks, Rachel. And again, please make note of your questions and comments. As you can see from our first 2 presenters, we hope you have lots of questions, but we also hope you have lots of ideas, because there are so many challenges that both these battles present. Last but not least, I want to introduce Camilo Villa. He's from SEIU, also Local 1, Local 1 Chicago, I guess it is. But Camilo is kind of like his union. He's very smart and very strategic, and he's also very tenacious. So he's been a great asset to our labor community in the last, 5 years? Have you been here 5 years that long? 8, okay, 8 years. And so he's got a little bit different story to tell, and I think when we get to the Q&A, we can, not just compare and contrast, but I think you can see some real differences between, where his union is and where a lot of other unions are. So go ahead, Camilo.
Thanks, Harriet. As Harriet said, my name is Camilo. I'm an organizer with SEIU Local 1. For those of you not familiar with SEIU's structure, we have sort of regional locals. So Local 1 is the Midwest regional local for the Building Services Division. So we cover everywhere from Chicago, Missouri to Cleveland, and everything in between. So we're pretty big. Since the beginning of SEIU, and certainly here in Cleveland since the 40s, organizing janitors has been our kind of reason to exist. So it's the fundamental workforce which our union is based on. And so I'm going to talk to you all briefly about our most recent Justice for Janitors campaign and, spoiler alert, our most recent Justice for Janitors victory. Before I do that, I just want to shout out to the non-union service staff here that I can see, going around behind you, making sure the refreshments are filled and the trash is pulled. Because even though we're at the Social Justice Institute at Case, it's important to recognize that our institutions contain multitudes, and despite having a Social Justice Institute, Case remains a extremely anti-union employer, and I think we should just recognize that and kind of put it on a hanger, because we're going to be revisiting that sometime in the future, I think. To start, I want to talk about something that's fundamental to our organizing, and the organizers in the room will certainly just, I hope, is something that's familiar to you, which is the structured organizing conversation. When an organizer is talking to a worker, or a leader is talking to a coworker, it's really important to move them into action. It's really important to have a structured conversation, a roadmap to the goal. And so, not to get too deep into it, but it starts with an introduction, and then through open-ended questions, we find out what that worker or that individual's issues are. We dig deep on them, find out how low wages affect their life, or lack of health care affect their children. Then we agitate around that. It's not fair. It's not right, because it's not. Then we and we name who's at fault, right? Is it the boss? Is it the building owner? Is it the president of the university? Then we provide a vision, which is an ideation of how coming together and joining with co-workers or fellow workers in mass movement is the path to change. And then we call the question on that person. Are you ready to join with your coworkers? Are you ready to join with your sisters and brothers in this union to make the changes that we just talked about, that you told me that you need? And then we talk about what the boss is going to do to them, which is what we call inoculation, what their coworkers are going to tell them, what they're going to hear in the public. Then we chart out the plan to win, right? This isn't just an idea. This isn't just a philosophy of strength and power. As unions, as a labor movement, we have a plan to strategically mobilize ourselves to achieve our goals. And without understanding that, without being bought in, no worker can truly be a part of that movement. And then, once they're in, of course, we invite them to become a leader in their shop and take our message back into the shop. The reason I wanted to focus on that is because that conversation is a structure, but it's not a script, right? Through open-ended questions, we discover, the organizer and the worker discover the path to change. The worker's story guides that conversation, and the organizer's creativity and skill drives the outcome. So I wanted to walk through it because when we are planning a campaign, we have to have a very similar approach. We have to build a campaign structure based around a formula that can deliver our goals, but the reality of our industry, the reality of the economy, the reality of our workforce is going to drive what actually comes out of that. So, when we are designing a campaign, in this case, a contract campaign, which I'll talk about our contracts in a second, we have to identify the issue. What are we fighting for, right? What is the thesis of this campaign? Is it healthcare? Is it wages? Is it dignity? Is it workload? And then we have to have a theory to win, which is who can deliver what we need and what do they respond to? What are the pressures that they respond to? What are the things that we can leverage in the community and the workplace, in politics, to drive that change? Then, of course, we pull out our calendars and we take a look at what some key dates are, and then we chart backwards and say, where do we need to be on April 1st of 2019? What does victory look like on April 21st, 2019? That's when our contract expired. And then we calendar an escalation, a crescendo toward that date. And we then get ideas. We create a campaign that is going to be compelling to achieve those goals. So, the first thing that we do is really, we plan years in advance. We just came off a 4-year contract. Really planning for our contract campaign started about 4 years ago. For some more specific context for what we were working on in Cleveland, Cleveland is an old city for our local, which means we've got a lot of contracts, right? A disproportionate number of contracts to how many members we have, because, for the last 70 years or so, our local is formed through many different iterations with many different contracts, and so there's a lot to do as from a bargaining perspective. But we also have some big ones, and this year, based on what we had bargained in the past, our 3 biggest contracts all lined up: the Cuyahoga Community College janitorial contract, the Arsler Middle steel mill contract, and then our master janitorial contract, which is the market-defining contract in every SEIU city with a janitorial local that covers all of the commercial office space downtown and some other things as well, but it is the plurality of our membership in just about every city, at least in that industry, and it is certainly the plurality of our membership here in Cleveland. So that is what we were bargaining over, and that is what we were planning towards. It was a little bit complicated because we had those 3 contracts, and we had to figure out how to make a campaign that was going to lift all of them up and raise standards across the board. We actually were able to turn that, I think, into an advantage, which I'll talk about. So we knew that our campaign had to have certain qualities to win. The first, and I think the most important, is that it had to be member-led and member-driven. We believe that we are a social union. We can't build a workers' movement without workers. And so we don't see that as a trade-off between strategy and decision-making versus like the values that we have of a social union. Centering it on our membership, centering it on our leaders' voices was a fundamental strategy. The second thing we knew is that we had to build a narrative that was bigger than just the 600 or 700 janitors under these contracts, right? Cleveland's not the biggest city, but it's a lot more than 600 or 700 people, right? We needed to talk about how our struggle in our communities went beyond just an individual worker or even an individual bargaining unit. And then also we knew that whatever we did, we had to use this every few year fight to build capacity, develop leaders, increase our ability to grow and take on the fights that we face inside and outside the workplace. We knew that these contract fights are a unique opportunity to build a stronger union, because we, as a labor movement, face too many attacks from our government, local and federal, from international capital, from every angle we are under attack, and so these contract campaigns are an opportunity for us to build a stronger movement to go forward. We also knew that our victory the terms of our victory needed to be defined by our members. If they did not believe that what we were fighting for and what our vision of victory was the right one, then we were not going to succeed. So we planned a lot early. We set bargaining dates months in advance so that we had something to build around and escalate around and toward. We also made one very big decision, which we've never made in Cleveland before. As you all, I'm sure, know, SEIU is one of the foundations of the Fight for 15. The movement that we helped start several years ago, defining 15 as sort of a base living wage for much of the country. And here in Cleveland, a very economically depressed city with depleting resources, or at least made available, depleting population, depleting public services, and low costs of living. 15 had been kind of out of reach, right? But in discussions with our member leaders and looking at where the economy was, looking at where our contracts were, economically, we made the decision that we were going to plant a flag that we were going to get a path to 15 in these contracts. And that was kind of scary, because if we came up short, then even if we got good contracts, that's still coming up short. So we gave ourselves some parameters that we had to meet. Otherwise, we would lose a little bit of swagger in the community and in our buildings. So, and we had, throughout this entire planning process, we had to have our members there right along with us. To make sure we were on track. And another thing that we knew we had to do is engage the media in this narrative very early. And strategically, we have a great comms team based in Chicago. We have a wonderful comms team in the IU that the IU made available to us. And then we've got some pretty capable staff here on the ground in Cleveland that could talk to reporters and set stuff up and make sure that that our story were being told. So our narrative was super simple. We said Cleveland is a divided city, right? We have income inequality, so we're divided economically. We're divided very distinctly east and west. That east and west is also a distinct racial segregation. We are one of the most segregated cities in the country. We have a downtown which has received billions in investment while neighborhoods continue to decline. And, on and on about the way that Cleveland is two cities or more than two cities. So our slogan was simple, and we kind of cribbed it from another local one city, Detroit. We said we need one Cleveland, right? A Cleveland for everybody. And, our path to that is, paying people more. And then it just boiled down a little a little closer to our core message was janitors need $15 an hour. If the millions of dollars invested in downtown, where all of the members in question work, then if the idea of the investment in downtown benefiting the entire city is true, then the people who live in impoverished neighborhoods who work downtown have to be paid more. Otherwise, it's not true, right? We also, our research team really dug into the public investment subsidies really for these buildings, which gave us a lot of ammunition, I think, to create a moral public argument from like a civic argument for these needs. So having this kind of campaign structure allowed us to build an escalating campaign on several fronts, in the media, in street actions, and then also our contracts didn't all expire on the same date, and so we set them up to bargain one after the other, going from smallest to largest, which worked out. to escalate. So it actually started with nearby here, the Severance Hall of the Musical Arts Association, where we have a very small unit, but we got a very distinct victory of a path to 15 for all of our members there. They're a nonprofit. They're bazillion dollars of endowment. It's the Cleveland Orchestra. It's like the best orchestra in the country. So, they could probably afford it. But, we got immediately into the Alt Weekly, and that went directly into coverage from Cranes, our business business newspaper, which, that's what the people that on the other side of the table are reading. And so very early on, that was like in January, I think, we were already beating this drum of $15 an hour for janitors. We knew we had to beat that drum constantly and consistently if we were going to win. So, we started at the community college. That was our first one, and we had our kickoff rally, which was on the day after Martin Luther King Day. We did it at the college. If you were here in Cleveland, you might remember the high that day was 6 degrees. Schools were closed. A lot of our members who work at night are either stay-at-home parents during the day, and then they switch off with a partner, or even more commonly, their grandparents who take care of their kids while their children work, and then they go to work. So that kind of hurt us because the schools were closed and people were at home with their kids. But it was small. It got noticed. A local TV station reached out to us because we were present on social media to kind of follow up, and we started that avenue of a media relationship, which is ongoing today. We really went into overdrive for these months of engaging our members, turning our leaders out to meetings, getting visibility in our buildings, taking photos with signs saying what 15 means to them, because that's what it had to be about, right? Is like $15 an hour to me means putting food on the table for my kids. $15 an hour to you might mean fixing your car or affording your bus pass. Everybody's story is different. Everybody's truth is different. But what's important is that it is their truth, and that's what our campaign was going to be based on. So at Tri-C, we even we took some of those photos. We did targeted social media ads because they were getting a little not wanting to budge. And so we knew we had to push, and we did a delegation. We showed up at the president's office with, I think like 15, 20 members. And one thing SCIU I think is pretty good at is stepping outside of our comfort zone and in order to make other people real uncomfortable. So, they're not used to, no boss, no president, no person in authority is used to workers showing up in an organized fashion, and it really makes a difference. And so we had to really fight to get where we got, but we had our win at Tri-C. We got our path to 15 at Tri-C. And so we were able to take that and move on. But we had to share that message. We got it out immediately into various media outlets. And so while we did this, we continued to build our narrative of Two Clevelands. Our members' voices were forefront. We were on the morning radio shows with our members talking about what 15 means to them. And it was a very disciplined message. So we were not giving the press a lot to work with other than what we wanted to see, right? Sorry, Rachel. But, we had a story to tell. And since every person who talked to the media, every member, leader, every janitor was saying the same thing, that's the story that was told, whether it was in the Cleveland Scene magazine or whether it was on Channel 5 or what have you. I think it's also worth noting here that we couldn't have these wins without having our story told. And that's why, aside from our, sisters and brothers in the labor movement getting the shaft by billion-dollar corporations in the media environment, when a newsroom goes from 300 people to 30 people, the people whose stories aren't being told are our members' stories. our community stories. And so it's really, I think, important for us to understand that those fights are super relevant to us winning our campaigns. We continue to escalate towards bargaining at the steel mill. We continue to have this story of two Clevelands. And so when I talked about the campaign structure and the escalation, that's why I'm talking about the creativity of our team could come through. We did something that I don't think anyone's ever done before, at least not here. We did what we called the Tale of Two Clevelands trolley tour. We didn't know what that was going to be like because we hadn't done it before, but we charted it out. We rented a trolley. We invited all of the building owners and all of City Council, none of whom came, but who was there was dozens of our members, and then I don't know, like 8 journalists, I think, two TV crews, the Alt Weekly, someone from the Plain Dealer, which, I don't know if you've ever been on a little touring trolley, but having two full TV crews gets a little cramped. But it was great because our stories were getting told. And so we drove around downtown. We pointed out some of the main buildings downtown that we were dealing with, and also talked about their public subsidies. And then we drove out into the neighborhoods where our members live, into the abandoned lots, and we drove past some of our members' houses, which next door is an empty lot, and on the other side is an abandoned building, and it was pretty bumpy because we don't take care of our streets here, and we were really able to highlight the disparities in the communities between where our members work and where our members live. I think that was a really impactful event, and wouldn't be surprised if it's picked up on in the future for some future campaigns. So right after that, we bargained the steel mill. And so the steel mill was probably our most depressed contract economically. There's a lot of history there from when the steel mill was shuttered for quite a while. If you're familiar with Cleveland, it's like the entire 400-acre site in the Industrial Valley. It was closed for a while, was brought back under contract work. The previous contractor worked well with an organization that to employ returned citizens, which is great because we believe very much. Well, first of all, most of them probably should never have been incarcerated in the first place, but once they're returned, they should have the same opportunities as anyone else. Unfortunately, this contractor also used that as a cudgel to hold over the heads of these members to not really fight for the wages that they deserve. So this was one of our toughest contracts, certainly our biggest low-wage contract. But through having built up this narrative, through really making it clear, through delegating to the steel mill leadership with dozens of members, we were able to win the most dramatic increases that we've ever seen in our local here in Cleveland. Some of those members over the life of that contract will see a 60% wage increase. And everyone currently there will be at 15 by the end of that contract.
We only have about 5 minutes left, so if you could wrap up.
Yep, I'm almost done. All right. All right. So, then we got into the real big one, the master contract, and we laid it out for them and said, you can't. Look at what we've done. Look at what janitors have achieved. You can't let the downtown lag behind. We got pretty far at the table. We had already had the most money on the table that our members have seen in a long time. But we had said that we were getting to 15, and we weren't there yet. So they said, no, we can't do any better. There's no more money. And we knew there was, because there always is. There's always more money, especially in commercial real estate. But we had planned for that. So RIU, months before, had planned a conference of training members on social media, training members and staff on social media. So we just happened to have like 150 people flying into Cleveland in the weeks interceding our negotiations. Our organizers, like I said, were in overdrive, turning people out. Our leaders were reaching levels that they had never reached before. And also we had like 40 people come down from Detroit. So we were able to put like 300 people into the street. We went and marched through where all of our local owners are, which was the real sticking point, right up to ABM, the main offices of the main employer. We shut down the street under this stupid chandelier that we have for as long as we wanted to, right? We had too many people. They couldn't get rid of us. So we hung out as long as we wanted, and then we left. And it worked, right? When we went back to bargaining, we won. We won a path to 15. The average wage for janitors in Cleveland at the end of this contract will be $15 an hour. We also protected our pension, and we protected 100% employer-paid health care for all of our members. We also developed a capacity within our membership to take on the future fights that I talked about. Well, I actually had something that I wanted to say at the end and I forgot. But, you know, the other nice thing is we said it was one Cleveland, and, you know, we didn't fix Cleveland with one janitorial contract. So that messaging is going to carry us through into our future fights. So we're super excited about where we landed. And if I didn't talk at all about how bargaining went, but if you want to know more about that, the lead bargainer's here. His name's Max Gerbach. He said I had to use the phrase genius negotiator. And you know, we can't do it without a complete team of organizers, media folks, and people at the table. So I encourage you to find him if you do want to talk to him about it, because it's some interesting stuff that went down.
Okay. We only have a couple minutes for questions, I think, so fire away. Any questions, comments? Yes. Go ahead.
Thank you. Is it on? I just want to say to each one of you, I mean, this is incredibly brave and creative and inspiring work, really, to each one of you. And my question is about, it seems like sort of maybe overriding or underlying or something, each of your struggles is the fact that we're in a for-profit driven economy where some people are the bosses and other people are the workers. And so even though there can be individual struggles, is there any way of addressing that bigger challenge of profit? The profit motive isn't about supporting human beings' lives, and that seems to be the framework that we need to challenge.
Unions, right? Isn't unions the answer to that? I mean, if you think about it, I was thinking as Camila was talking that, and you didn't really mention this, but there's been a ripple effect even in non-organized places based on their messaging, where other people are now going, yeah, we deserve $15 too, right? And hey, all you institutions who say that, you know, you do all this work for humans in our community and you help the poor, what are you paying your lower wage workers? So I think that there is a way through that messaging and through that effort to make things better for everybody. I find it really interesting that even those in government in our city, on one hand, they're talking about all the millions and billions of dollars that get spent on supporting the poor, but then when it comes to negotiating contracts for folks that work in a jail or folks that are, you know, janitors or whoever else, they're like, we really can't pay you that much. You know, we're willing to put money into a pot over here to help you get public aid, but we're not willing to pay you this wage. So I think kind of connecting those things. I mean, we've had a mayor in Cleveland for a long time that has said, hey, you know, prevailing wage, we want everybody to get, you know, jobs in Cleveland should go to people in Cleveland, they should get paid a fair wage. But it became a lot trickier when everybody wanted folks at City Hall to get paid at least $15 an hour. But through that conversation, that path is happening. So whether it's not a direct negotiation or an effect of that conversation in the community, it does kind of work, I think.
Yeah, it's interesting that the anti-union Cleveland Clinic and the anti-union University Hospital have quietly raised their wages along with the city.
I mean, I think you might be driving a little bit at a deeper point too, which is we do need to work towards dismantling capitalism, right? And so, you know, but in our individual labor fights, I think we have two goals, especially with low wage workers, right? One is to address the immediate immiseration of our communities, and one of those ways is through raising wages. But that's also why one of the priorities of campaigns like the ones we run are to build a broader movement, so that we don't have the mass movement to address the structural issues of our economy and our society yet, but these kinds of fights can be the radicalizing and empowering fights for working people that is going to build the capacity that will be necessary to do that.
So on the heels of dismantling capitalism, my question is, how do we start also illuminating the complexities of and the diversity of the workers that we're talking about? I do think that kind of underlying the conversations were conversations around race and gender, but it wasn't really explicitly kind of put out there. And so I'm really interested in who we're talking about in Cleveland and how we start to illuminate the various communities of color and the various voices that we might not necessarily be hearing or even being able to see who we're talking about.
Yeah, thank you for that. And it's an oversight on my part. I meant to say it on the outset. Local 1 in Cleveland is definitely a majority women workforce. I don't know the percentages, but I know that because these are my units that I work with. Overwhelmingly women, and then probably if I had to guess, I would say 80% of our membership in Cleveland is African American, and then another 10 or 15% are Latino. So and that's the other thing that it was one of the reasons that it's so important that in any public campaign our membership be the face of our campaigns, because when a janitor was in the press talking about the need for 15, it was usually an African-American woman talking about what that means to her and her community. So thank you for that question. I apologize for the oversight, because that was critical to the story that we were telling and the real experience of our membership in Cleveland.
Good morning. My question is for Kelly. I've actually am a student here at Case, but I also volunteer at a couple of the local schools. And I went to a conference back in February where we discussed education, the need for us to start directing more of our funding towards education, because we spend $99.45 a day on prisoners, and we always shoot down anything regarding education to the point where we're spending less than a third of that on students. What actions can someone in a position like my own start taking to kind of bring awareness? Because every time I tell people, do you realize that we spend over $228 million a year just on education? I'm sorry, and I think that's billion. I'm not sure, because we have like 2.3 million people incarcerated, and we spend millions of dollars a day on, I think it's like $225 million a day for prisoners. But we don't want to spend that on the very people that will be taking over this country in the next 20 years. How can someone like me bring awareness to that? Because no one knows those numbers.
Yeah. I think one thing that the union did for me was feeling empowered and understanding my rights about what I could talk about with my students too. As an art teacher, I have the Ohio State standards to follow, but it was easy to teach a lesson about 1960s pop art and protest signs and what would you stick up for, and did you know that this is what if you have ADHD, that you get this many $1,000s a year from the government. Do you know how it's spent? Or do you know what other jobs? Or I would just talk about people in my personal life, like that I had lived with when I first started teaching, that I lived with 2 waitresses and they made a lot more money than I did. Things like that. I think talking to children about it, people who choose to go into education. I know our history teacher did that too. And I was always in ignorant bliss and kind of just like, I'm just going to do what's required, fly under the radar. and then realizing that when you're asking questions, and I didn't even realize like that I was working for a company, and I worked there for 15 years, and I thought I was an art teacher, but I'm also an employee of a management company, and I think asserting yourself, period, but asserting yourself to have some say in how the money is spent that is supposed to be spent on you and the children that you serve.
Everyone give our panelists a hand.